Behind me is a resource that links virtually every era of civilization. It was first mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh over 4,100 years ago, and yet the British used it to help them win World War I. It was used in the mummification of the pharaohs and to write some of the very first hieroglyphics of ancient Egypt. It helped build the Temple of Solomon, and yet it saved the Phoenicians from the Bronze Age collapse. Without this resource, there is no Carthage. It was mentioned in the Bible over 100 times, and yet to this day, thousands of years later, it remains the defining symbol of a nation. This resource helped give us Sumer, Babylon, the Assyrians, the Arabians, Israel, Rome, Greece, the Phoenicians, and the Ottomans. And yet, I bet you've never even heard of it. This was protected by Emperor Hadrian of Rome and the last Empress of Germany. This may well be the most important resource in all human history. "4,000 years ago, in the very first civilization that dawned on this planet, a poem was written about a king named Gilgamesh. Perhaps you've heard of it. In that poem, they spoke of a great forest, a forest where that king defeated the demon Humbaba and was granted all of his sacred trees, trees that he then cut down and used to build a ship that could handle the mighty Euphrates, as well as a gate for his ceremonial city Nippur, which would have been of incredible significance, because not only were city entrances in Sumerian culture of great religious and spiritual value, but Nippur was considered the center of the cosmos, the seat that provided a Sumerian king his power. For this wood to be the foundation of that city was no less than calling it the foundation of the universe itself. The forest that poem was referring to was this one. These are the cedars of Lebanon, or more scientifically, Cedrus libani, which naturally makes this the country of Lebanon. Although I suppose depending on the era we're discussing, Lebanon might not actually refer to the country, but rather this specific mountain range. The name Liban is derived from the ancient word for white, meaning the snow that was historically surrounding these trees, virtually the only snow that can be found in the Middle East, at least outside of Iran. Which means that this mountain and these cedars, at least historically speaking, are the truest core of Lebanon. And for that matter, they always have been. Ever since that poem was written, for the next 4,000 years, no matter which civilization came across this land, these cedars have virtually always retained that Sumerian importance. They were mentioned by Sargon of Akkad. They were used in the ziggurat at Ur. Virtually all mummifications would have included at least some of this wood. In the kingdom of Kemet, now known as ancient Egypt, the first patches of papyrus on which some of the earliest forms of hieroglyphics would ever be recorded would be done so in this cedar sap. The great palatial temples and colossal city entrances, just as with those Sumerians before them, would rely on cedar from Lebanon to exist. It was fundamental in building the greatest palaces and temples that up until then our world had ever known. But even more than that, it would also allow their empire to rise through trade. Starting at least 3,500 years ago, the pharaohs of Egypt would have built their personal boats from these trees. Boats that would eventually let them conquer not just the Nile, but the Mediterranean beyond. It was so important to the ships of Egyptian history that they would become colloquially known as Byblos, after the Lebanese city that made them. This cedar would allow them access to the great civilizations of the Minoans and Mycenaean Greeks. It would even eventually help them conquer the Phoenician cities that once supplied it to them. And as Egypt itself had little in the way of forests, access to reliable timber would have been absolutely vital in maintaining their growing imperial power. And although other options would have been available from Africa, India, and elsewhere in their trade network, the Lebanese cedar was simply one of a kind. Because although many trees have their own unique value, this specific cedar is special. It's softer than oak, which makes it more flexible, and yet it remains just as strong. It's easy to shape into curved forms like that of a ship's hull, and yet through its overabundance of sap, it has a natural resistance to both rot and the common parasites that often ruin lumber. And naturally, in the ancient world, with little in the way of chemical coating, that would have been a very big deal. To this day, there are many examples of this lumber having survived for thousands of years without rotting. And what's more, with its flexibility, not to mention its straight trunk, it could be used to create masts that could bend rather than snap, providing sails that could handle the hard winds of the deep Mediterranean, allowing sailors to go further, faster, and safer than ever before. It was enough to create an international trade empire. It was, simply put, the perfect wood to make a ship out of. Certainly the best that any culture that ever rose out of this region would have ever encountered, at least. And so, of course, it was prized, beyond prized even. This was the foundation stone, the very basis of civilizations, and none of those more so than the Phoenicians, who are the predecessors of modern Lebanon. A decentralized culture with no formal authority, the ancient trade cities of Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad would have amassed their great wealth almost entirely thanks to this tree. With direct access to the Mountain of White, it would have allowed them to build up an unprecedented fleet, a fleet that would forge the greatest trade network of their time and in turn give them the capacity to rise up out of the Bronze Age faster than their neighbors. With these trees and the ships that came out of them, they were able to fill the vacuum of vacant trade posts that Minoa, Egypt, the Hittites, and Greece had once held across the Mediterranean. With these ships, they were able to found Carthage, despite it being at a distance that virtually no other civilization could have found even possible. Their sailors would rule outposts as far as southern Spain, perhaps even as far as the Azores, although that's yet to be truly confirmed. Some even say that they were able to round the southern Cape of Africa, circling the entire continent and returning through the mouth of Gibraltar years later. Now, I can't say that actually happened, but if it did happen, it did so because of these trees. When David built his palace, when Solomon built his great temple, they used cedars from Lebanon. The Bible mentions this forest between 103 and 108 times, depending on which version you read. The Romans would value these trees so heavily that the Emperor Hadrian would build a, I suppose, less famous wall here in Lebanon just to protect them. You can still find stones from it in the University of Beirut Museum, although they did not let me film. But with so much importance and so many empires demanding tribute from this land, eventually the trees would virtually all be cut down. By the 16th century, visiting Europeans coming to see the forest that their Bible mentioned could find fewer than 3 dozen remaining. In 1550, Pierre Belon would count 28. By the 1700s, it was down to 20. But the thing about Lebanon is that it has always been a phoenix. And the Christians of this valley stood back up on their feet, and with renewed national interest and an increase in foreign wealth, the desire to replant God's forest started to grow. Within a few generations of their near-total collapse, the region of Bashari would become one of Earth's first natural protected zones. By the 1850s, visitors would count over 100 trees, and by 1876, the last empress of Germany would follow Hadrian's lead and build her own wall of protection. A wall that the British Empire would ignore when they needed lumber for their wartime railway, but the times had changed, and even those great Brits couldn't quite stop the return of the cedars of God. In 1985, Lebanon nationally recognized the value of these forests and began an earnest replanting effort that has seen over 180,000 trees returned to these mountains, a little spot of green in this great country of white. Upon independence, the nation would choose this specific tree, a cedar that is likely 3,000 years old, as the image that best represented their nation. Today you can see it everywhere in this country. It is their most universal symbol of pride. In 1998, UNESCO declared this forest a Site of World Heritage, on par with the greatest temples of antiquity. Which seems rather fitting, considering these are the trees that built them. Today, Lebanon could not be more proud of its cedars, because just like them, no matter how close they came to destruction, they've always found a way to come back. Lebanon is a phoenix, a linchpin of civilization since the very beginning. This is rare earth.
Small gift from the Cedar Wood.
Well, thank you.
Francois is my name.
Nice to meet you, Francois.
Welcome.
Appreciate it.